Good morning. The last few years have given us more and more elaborate and technical forms of communication, but sometimes more complicated isn't better. Today, we're talking about keeping the human in our communications, and we're joined by Chris Lysy. Chris is a freelance designer and evaluator who just supports all kinds of digital projects and programs, and he is also a cartoonist. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. This is a 30-minute conversation with the leaders of mission-based organizations about issues that are urgent to us right now. I am Peta Blakely, and I am the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting. I help mission-based organizations measure and maximize their impact. I'm joined today by Cynthia.
I am Cynthia Rojas, and I am the principal and founder of To Your Growth. Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Rebecca is with us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Tuttle. I'm the founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
Nice. Hi.
And if you are joining us this morning, please tell us in the comments where you're joining us from.
And Chris Lysy joins us this morning. Chris recently published a book of cartoons about evaluation, and he's here to talk with us today about communication, both high-tech and low-tech. Welcome, Chris. How are you today? Welcome to Coffee Time.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is fun.
You're so interesting, Chris. I can't wait for this conversation.
Now, Chris, you recently published a book of cartoons about program evaluation. How did you get started drawing cartoons?
It was starting drawing cartoons. Probably started when I was a kid. I was doodling constantly, but I didn't really think of it or do it until I got an iPad, really. And then I was playing around with cartoons on the plane on the way to an evaluation conference back in 2011. And I just started drawing cartoons, and people liked them, so I kept drawing cartoons. And yeah, that's the story.
That's one way to do it. Wow, so you haven't been really drawing that long. Your drawings are excellent, but that's really interesting that you kind of just picked it up and then went with it, and it's kind of your passion in what you're doing. That's great.
It's been super fun. It's a fun way to talk about something that people don't usually have fun talking about. So that's what I like about it. And yeah, in addition to me, I get to give other people fun ways to talk about things that they don't want to talk about necessarily.
Ooh, we're excited for today's show then.
Chris, I'm curious. What do you say when people ask you, what do you do for a living?
It depends on the person. I mean, really, it's usually I just say I'm a consultant. Sometimes the cartoonist gets a conversation going. So if I want a conversation, I say a cartoonist. If not, if you really don't want a conversation, you say you're an evaluator, and they're like, "Oh,
and nobody
I don't know
wants
what that is."
Oh, no.
And why do you think that your cartoons gain so much traction so quickly?
I think there are lots of things that people feel. There are lots of things that people see. There are messages hidden in the work of evaluators, of theorists, of practitioners of all sorts. And there are these like little inside jokes and these tough ethical dilemmas and challenges that evaluators face on like a daily basis. So all I've really done over time is just take some of those things that people have written about, talked about, things that I've noticed, that friends have noticed, and put some funny characters around them, and then put them up as a cartoon and share them on Twitter. It's the science behind it is just not that. It's not about finding something new to say or saying something. It's just taking the realities of what can be a tricky job and putting them out in a way that people can actually digest them and start talking about them.
So we named the show Unconventional Communication. Right Now Flawed is Better. Because you have a philosophy that perfection is not what we should be aiming toward. And so is that because of the pandemic and we need to give ourselves a break, or did you always feel that way?
I'm so I earned a degree in sociology. And at one point, I was trying to become a psychologist. And the reason I like sociology is because it's all about the context. It's less about the individual person. It's about the stuff around.
Right.
And right now, when you look around at people and you'll do web design or other design things or program design or evaluation, and you just see how overwhelmed people are.
So,
I was going somewhere.
do you feel like right now in particular, we shouldn't be aiming for perfection?
Yes.
Is
I
that
think
always-
right now in particular, perfection is not the aim. There was, when the web started coming around, everybody's trying to figure out how to use it. How do we connect with each other? How do we, the first generation web stuff, it's all about like taking the stuff we do offline and bringing it online, but it only takes a part of it. So like forums, it's not like a real forum. It's like different. Now it has a thread of that, but then as times go, social media has evolved, web media has evolved, our practice has evolved, and now we're all online, we're all on video, and we're trying to figure out how to be people again, even across this digital medium. And so one of the things I found through my cartoons is to cartoon for people. So I used to use type in my cartoons. But then over time, I just started scribble drawing, and I have typos, and I've weird lines, and characters don't always have the right number of fingers, and but it doesn't really matter because all that stuff just shows that there's a person behind the cartoon. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it connects better that way. So, and that's the part. It's the evidence. It connects better.
And that's such an interesting point that people are. My husband and I were just talking this morning about the rise in home crafts because people are home more because of COVID, and everybody's taking up baking and knitting and like trying to make things with their hands. There's this craving for things that are not mass produced and not perfect.
Yeah, I've taken on coloring. And I'm like really into it. I don't know how much I've invested in markers, but they're awfully expensive. They're very expensive. Yeah. I need another hobby, a new hobby.
You can't just color pencils. You can get so many more.
Chris, you have also been consulting in helping people take their events online and do training and events online. So what are the important issues for people to keep in mind when they're communicating either one-on-one or to multiple people virtually like we are now?
I think people have been kind of looking at digital and thinking, okay, how do I put on a perfect webinar? Or how do I reach out to these people on Facebook or on Twitter? And thinking about all these different facets of these platforms and how they can actually be on these platforms and reach other people. But the essence of an event, the essence of a program, the technology is only a very small part of it. The technology piece doesn't really matter all that much. Usually there's something that they're trying to accomplish there, and taking these events and bringing them online, you have to figure out what the essence of the event is supposed to be. Are people trying to connect with other people? Are you creating a networking event? Are you creating a series of presentations? Conferences, for instance, we all think, oh, well, you have these conferences. So you have these keynotes and you have these sessions and then you have networking. Well, if we're going to go online, the knee-jerk thing is to go, okay, we'll just have the plenaries and we'll put them online and we'll create videos with plenaries. But that's not why people go to the conference in the first place. They go to connect with each other. So if putting the plenaries online, it's never going to feel anywhere close to the live event. So what can you do to get people to connect with each other? Is that breakout rooms? Is that unconventional presentations and discussions? So it's trying to think about all that kind of stuff when doing any kind of thing online, whether it's a blog post or a community practice or a digital event.
That's awesome. I attended one of the best online events I attended. There were two of them, but one of them I can choose a room to go into. So the rooms were themed. And so I could just hang out in a room. And I thought that was really cool. I have not seen that since. And then I attended a book party event on Zoom, and it was so well orchestrated. It had an MC through the whole entire event, it had different events. And I have to tell you, it looks so seamless. I'm getting some kickback. I'm sorry. It felt seamless. It felt live. I mean, it was live, but I didn't feel like I was in front of Zoom. It was an extraordinary experience. Haven't seen it since, though. So I think your approach about you tend to start with what's the human experience we want to have. Those two events literally did that. I think other events are, again, thinking about the perfection, the technology, the replication of doing something live and putting it on Zoom versus what's this experience going to be like? Yeah?
I have a question.
Sure.
How can we find you on Twitter? Can I put your Twitter handle in the comments?
Sure. It's at C Lysy. So it's @ CLYSY. So my last name, first initial, first name, then last name.
CLYSY.
Yep, that's right. 5 letters.
Thank you.
And
No
so
problem.
you put your cartoons up in Twitter. You share them in Twitter. Are you on Instagram?
Quasi. I've tried it. It hasn't worked for me yet.
I take that as a no.
That's a no.
So you said that we're talking about how we shouldn't be expecting perfection during COVID, during pandemic, or really ever, because there's no such thing. And you had made mention that you create these cartoons to get people going and engaged in conversation. What is it that you hope people will get out of these conversations? Because I think this is an awesome opportunity to share with our audience and others what you do, because I think that the humor in the cartoon or the aha moment in the cartoon depiction is a great way to get people to talk about things that make them uncomfortable. And right now, what we need more of are uncomfortable conversations.
I agree. I think one of the mistakes in thinking about data visualization or cartooning or any of this stuff as simplifying things is, yeah, in a way, but really it's about taking complex ideas, conversations, and making them approachable so that we can actually engage with them. There's somebody I was reading early on in my career, Hugh MacLeod, who draws these cartoons or drew these cartoons at Gaping Void. And he said that you need to create social objects, that if you want a discussion, you need to have an object out there that people can engage around. So this show right here is a social object. It creates a space where people can come and have harder conversations. Well, cartoons can operate in the same way. You can create a cartoon and it creates its little orbit around it where people have discussions, conversations. And then that cartoon can expand beyond that. So the cartoon can then go into presentations. It can then go into meeting rooms. It can go into books and textbooks and other things as a trigger for a conversation. And so that's the idea. It's not about how do you simplify something so that people can understand it. It's how do you adapt something so that people can approach it. And sometimes that's keeping it uncomfortable, keeping it confusing, or leaving all the subtleties and all the craziness or ridiculousness in the thing in the first place. It doesn't have to be simple; it just has to be approachable.
I like that, approachable.
I'm also, a data viz nerd, but one of the things that you've talked about is there's more and more and more technology, and it's really tempting to be in love with Tableau and Power BI and the capacity of those platforms. But you've said that's not what it's about, that fancier or more technology driven isn't necessarily what matters. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So this comes from years of experience in contract research with federal agencies, Department of Education, Department of Health, that you have these kind of big contracts and these big organizations, and they're trying to do this large evaluation. And so they're like, well, we need to get these better tools so that we can do the thing. And but then they try to look at a tool like the tool itself is going to make the visualization better. Tableau and Power BI are interactive visualization tools. What they let you do is they let you take a mass amount of data and break it down so it's approachable. But what organizations often try to do is they take little bits of data, stuff that you could just put together a little chart and send it out and would be just as effective. And then they try to put it into Tableau and have Tableau do that same thing that you could probably just do with a pencil and a piece of paper. And and that's a challenge. It's not that the tools aren't useful. It's that most of the time the way in which we're using the tools doesn't really make sense. If you don't have the data for Tableau, you don't need Tableau. And if you can draw it on a piece of paper, just draw it on a piece of paper. It's so much easier and quicker and more efficient. And then you can do more evaluation, analysis, and dissemination. So that's usually my feeling.
I think that's such an important point. Like, the technology is not going to do anything that the data couldn't do, right? And you need to be able to analyze the data yourself to use those tools effectively. So the limitation is your data and your own capacity to engage with it, not the technology. Yeah.
So Peter has pulled up or found an example, and so I'm down to see.
This is a cartoon that Chris made special for us. So, and it talks about some of the important issues that we have talked about in leading mission-based organizations right now, and the difference between leading and managing.
Wow. I love that.
So perfect.
I love that. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. And
while we're here, go ahead, Cynthia.
No, I can see how this, you were just talking about an object, and that can become the focus of conversation. I could totally see how this can engage people in having a conversation versus reading a one-pager about leadership and management, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's so right. We will share that on social media and see how it starts a conversation.
Like fresh spectrum there.
Yep. That's just been my website for a long time. It was two words that I threw together, and the .com was available and that became my website, even though I've kind of a lisp, so it's hard to say for me. So it's like, even though I've tried to go away from it, it's on so many of my cartoons I can't. So I have fresh spectrum that I can barely say, and that's my website.
But it's incredibly well known, and everybody associates it with you. So you're stuck with it.
Stuck with it. Yeah.
Funnily enough, that's kind of how our show got named. It's roughly the same process. We were Masterminds and we were having coffee. And that's how we named our show. Now we're stuck with it. So.
I can't believe it was much more complicated than that. Myra says, yes, please share. She'd love to use that with her teams. Myra works in the school system in New York City, right, Cynthia?
Yes, she does. All right. Yeah, Myra, I think this would be a great conversation tool for your team in a way that's unconventional. So yeah, I'm sorry, Chris, you were going to say?
Just that sometimes too, is some of the cartoons that I've shared, that one's kind of an example of that there's usually a point. So the point was something that Peter was talking about, how there's a difference between leadership and management, and the idea between the two. And usually when people look at a cartoon, they'll think about like, oh, well, that's what a leader should be. Or they'll look at it and going, well, that management's important, because if all those people try to climb that hill together, somebody's going to fall down. You need that person at the bottom. And there are a number of evaluation cartoons that I've done that have that kind of duality too, where depending on what you feel and think, you're going to come at that cartoon in a very different way. And you're like, well, that manager is important. And what's interesting, until you have that conversation, you don't know how people are reading it. So even something as simple as a cartoon creates this thing that everybody just assumes somebody's reading it one way, but it's not always like that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very.
To know, what do we do with a team member who's sometimes uncoachable? And how do you get through that frustration that you feel as a leader or manager when you're trying to coach people who just are resisting?
You give them a cartoon. You have a conversation.
Not coachable.
Yeah, I think that's a hard question, because the non-coachable can be related to a couple of things. And so instead of starting with wanting to coach someone, starting with that person. And this may not be just one conversation, but what's driving that person's behavior. And it doesn't have to be so straightforward. You could have just on your one-on-one, just regular conversations, and start to get a sense and build some trust on what's going on with this individual, and then lead into coaching. But if you start with coaching, there's a core assumption built into that there's something wrong with that person. And so maybe that's off-putting to that person. So start just natural conversation as you would any of your teammates, and grow into a coaching situation. That would be my advice. But it's not fun, Myra. We all feel that pain as leaders.
Have you ever had any controversy over your cartoons?
I think not as much as I would have thought I would have early on. I think there are these topics that people feel like, oh, you can't really talk about that, or you can't really say that. In truth, you can a lot of the time. You can say all sorts of random stuff. And with cartoons, what's interesting is that you can just say ridiculous things with cartoons that you could never write, that you can never speak. And it doesn't really throw people off. They're like, it's a cartoon. You can have a person, and he's like, you're an idiot. And they're like, oh, ha, 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 cartoon. So not really. I have had a number of people who shared stories with me, and they're like, can you please turn these into cartoons? And the stories are all like ethical dilemmas or other things. And I'm like, yeah, sure. But don't mention my name. I don't want my name getting out as part of this. And so I've had those kind of things, but not really any true controversy over my cartoons.
So people,
that you're saying the medium itself makes the message more palatable.
Yeah.
And then, that makes me think the opposite. Maybe the reason we're all so in love with fancy data visualizations is the medium itself makes the data look more serious, right? And more precise.
Yeah.
There's a data visualization person I've been sharing a lot about recently, and I'm blanking on her name, but I will find it in a second. But her point is that she made, she draws pictures, and she draws a lot of infographics by hand. And the reason she draws them by hand and she illustrates them, and she's in the Guardian and a bunch of these other places, is that there's this faulty sense of precision in data visualization, that you take away the person, and then all of a sudden this chart looks like something that's not just a bunch of messy data that somebody pulled together. That if you're going to create and share it, just make it messy, so at least people know that there's a human behind it, and that there's this whole human experience behind collecting that data and sharing that data.
Hmm.
I'm gonna
I
find
love
her.
that. Yeah, find her name. I followed the one, but
Mona Chalabi.
okay.
Do you know how to spell that?
Writing it down.
Sure, it's Mona, M-O-N-A,
Mhm.
and Chalabi is Chalabi.
All right,
Nice.
put that in the chat. And she also is a cartoonist.
She is an artist and a data visualization person, probably more a data journalist, I would
Oh,
call
I
her.
like that. Okay, I'm just putting it in the chat if anyone wants to.
That's
look.
great.
Thank
So, Chris, I think I forgot my line of so if somebody wanted you, so someone can hire you to do an illustration of, let's say they're doing a training and it's a hard conversation. A lot of nonprofit organizations are doing trainings and workshops around racial inequity. They can reach out to you and work with you on building something that embraces conversation. Is that how people? Is that a service that you provide?
Theoretically, it's a process. It's something I could provide. But I found out years ago, I have had some cartoon projects where I've created cartoons for university programs, for nonprofit programs, marketing, just things to go around a certain campaign or conversations or conference. But most of the time, I do far better as a consultant if I shift my consulting work around putting on digital events or facilitating communities of practice or doing large scale program evaluation. The cartooning has always been secondary. That's why it's taken me like 10 years to put out a book, because it's kind of just, it's something I do. When I try to make it into a business, it becomes less fun. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I just enjoy it. That's why I'm here. I don't, people have been buying the book. They've been enjoying it. If anybody wants to buy it, please do. But they're free cartoons. But if you don't feel like spending any money, you just want to sort through my site, you can find all the same cartoons that are in my book on my website for free. It's not like I'm hiding anything. Then you can put them in all your presentations. The book just makes it easier and gives you something to hold in your hands.
That's so cool. I keep thinking about all the time I spent reading about color theory, how people read data. I mean, I could go on and on because I would present data or I would present findings to non-data people all the time. This is the only audience the primary audience that I have primarily presented to, and it's always been challenging. And I'm thinking about all these years and how I think people would have appreciated a cartoon or two.
I think it would help a lot. So before we close, I want to make sure everybody knows about a couple of opportunities. One, Chris's book is available on Amazon. And his illustrations are also on his website and on Pinterest. And two, Chris has recently released a course about getting started as a consultant. And information about that course is on freshspectrum.com. Chris, do you want to? There we go. Chris, do you want to leave anybody with any final thoughts? Like, what should people be doing right now in the land of leadership through Zoom meetings and trying to run programs without face-to-face communication? What's the number one thing people should have in mind right now?
Remember that people are people, but that whether or not you're somewhere else or you're across video or whatever, just connect with the people in whatever way you can connect with the people. Think about them and their challenges, and less about you, and then take breaths and breathe deep, because it's hard on everybody.
I love that. Think about them and their challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
I think, my big takeaway is we've talked about adapting and innovating a lot on this show. And I think Chris has me thinking differently about what it means to adapt things into online spaces, and
Yeah.
how maybe the things that seemed a priority in face-to-face communications are less important.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my big takeaway from here is really have fun, right? We are in this for a long time. And we started out stressed out because we didn't know what to expect. And then these deadlines kept getting pushed out. And now we know we're in this for a much longer haul. And the truth of the matter is, it is time to have fun with what we have. And you do this, Chris, by doing illustrations, but also I love your focus on humans and always putting the human first. So thank you for that. Thank you. Rebecca, what's your takeaway?
I believe in the power of visualization, as we need something right now to connect us, to get the conversation going, something that's non-threatening, but can also encourage and invoke ideas from a host of different people. And I think that what you're doing, Chris, is a great avenue to do that. And we interpret what we see from our own perspective. So you could have a cartoon or an illustration out there, and you could evoke a different emotion in almost everyone who sees it, and a different translation. I think that's pretty powerful.
Certainly a lot of fun.
You are having fun. Well,
Thank you so much for
this was fun.
And thank you all for having me. It's been
really
fun.
fun and interesting show. And have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.